In the early 70s, the most popular Italian sports car in the US was not a Ferrari, not a Lamborghini, it was this, the Pantera. Perhaps this is no surprise to many. The Pantera was the result of a joint effort between Ford and De Tomaso, an Italian sports car company that was run by an eccentric man with a single-minded obsession. Kind of like Bizzarini, burning through cash, chasing after his sole passion, racing. But unlike Bizzarini, De Tomaso had cash from rich in-laws. Today we're diving into the life of Alejandro de Tomaso, a former F1 racing driver turned founder of a sports car company. But before we dive in, I'd like to point out one thing. There seems to be no one definitive authority over Alejandro's life, except maybe this book. Now, there are a lot of books and articles and YouTube videos that have talked about De Tomaso, but you would be surprised to find that almost every source presents conflicting facts about not just the person, but about the company itself as well. Now, writing about classic cars is difficult not just because the sources are difficult to obtain, but whatever literature written about them tends to be extremely niche and therefore very expensive. Writing about De Tomaso has been doubly difficult as people have claimed very different accounts of his life, and almost every single source out there has gotten at least one fact about him completely wrong. The early years of Alejandro's life are buried under layers of rumors and legends, making uncovering the truth very difficult. From what I can gather, the latest book written about him, De Tomaso Racing Blue Blood, presents the most up-to-date and factually accurate information. But of course, I cannot verify that as the $450 price tag with 550 limited production severely hampers accessibility. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that this video is absolutely not the complete story of De Tomaso, but I have done my best to rectify facts that are clearly false, and even with the thick fog of misinformation shrouding an otherwise genuinely fascinating story, what we know of Alejandro's life is still worth listening to. It really is quite entertaining. Anyway, let's dive right in, shall we? Alejandro de Tomaso was born in Buenos Aires in 1928. He was born into a wealthy family. His father was the Minister of Agriculture in Argentina. So yes, Alejandro had cash, but when he turned 5, his father died of an illness at a young age of 44. Fact check. Multiple authority databases very clearly show Antonio de Tomaso's birth year as 1889 and death as 1933. Therefore, he died when he was 44, not 38 as a lot of sources claim. Now, the responsibility of running the vast family estate fell to Alejandro when he was a teenager. While he continued on with his education, he eventually dropped out of university to become a racing driver. Kind of. He had made an acquaintance with Roberto Mieres, a famous Argentine racing driver who happened to own a Bugatti. There are sources that claim Alejandro raced in it, but others claim that there exists no record of this ever happening. In any case, Alejandro fell in love with racing, and this obsession would never truly go away. De Tomaso must have felt that to play in the big leagues, he had to go to Europe. Italy was a natural choice, as he had Italian heritage through his father, and of course, some of the best sports cars were being pumped out of the country. His trip to Italy came sooner than expected, when he was supposedly arrested under the Peron regime for working on an anti-Peronist newspaper. He was subsequently exiled to the countryside, and with nothing more to lose, he left the country altogether. Now here's another questionable fact about him. Donut Media's Past Gas once talked about De Tomaso, where they shared an insane tale of Alejandro flying a plane by himself with his wife to Uruguay and then to Italy to flee house arrest in Argentina. I think it's incredibly unlikely that this was true. One thing is the fact that Alejandro returned to Buenos Aires multiple times to race in the following years. It is highly unlikely that a target of a dictator who had fled under cover with his private plane would be able to freely enter in and out to partake in a televised motorsports event. The other thing is the suspect's story about him just bringing his wife. What about his 3 children? Anyway, back to the story. He was now in foreign land as a foreigner, with very little to no cash. But thanks to his short racing stints in Argentina, which the Maserati brothers had noticed, he was quickly recruited as a mechanic/driver by OSCA. While he worked, his passion for racing never vanished. And as he was touring the Maserati factory with the hopes of racing one of their cars, he met his second wife, Isabelle Haskell. Fact check. Now, many sources claim that Isabelle Haskell was a granddaughter, sometimes the daughter of William C. Durant, one of the founders of GM. This is not true, as a quick search of William C. Durant's genealogy tree shows that he had 2 kids, and only one of them was a daughter, and she never married anyone with the Haskell name. In fact, Isabelle Haskell was the granddaughter of Jonathan Amory Haskell, who was once the vice president of GM and DuPont. So yeah, that's probably where people got confused. Now back to the story. Isabelle herself was a racing driver. Funded mostly by Haskell's wealth, Isabelle and Alejandro began racing together, with the highlight being 1,000 kilometers of Buenos Aires in 1957, where the pair of them came first in class. Alejandro made a couple of more impressive class wins, including the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1958 and an OSCA S750. And around this time, the desire to build his own race cars got into Alejandro's head. And so he did. In 1959, Isabelle and Alejandro founded the De Tomaso company in Modena to design and build race cars. Some of the first cars that rolled out of the factory were Formula 2 and Formula Junior category racers with an OSCA engine. While he did manage to get some orders in, he was soon distracted by another project that completely outshadowed any of his existing ones: Formula 1. Yup, he built F1 cars. You see, he used to race in F1, and now he was looking to get back in, this time as a manufacturer. And for someone with no formal degree in engineering, the ambition itself was worth high praise. And while he miraculously found buyers, including Count Volpi of Scuderia Serenissima himself, the cars failed to compete with the then dominant racers from Lotus, BRM, and Cooper. And as he did this, he burned through cash like nobody's business. Probably. As we all know, racing is expensive, and according to Isabelle herself, her family was not too keen on her being involved in such dangerous sports. The funding was tight, and Alejandro needed to make them elsewhere. In doing so, he modeled after Enzo Ferrari himself. He entered the road car business. In 1965, the Vallelunga entered production through Carrozzeria Ghia, an Italian coach-building company that designed the VW Carmen Ghia. But Ghia only managed to produce 50 of these Vallelungas, which were nowhere near the production numbers you need to sustain a racing team and a sports car manufacturing factory. But as the meager production continued, De Tomaso kept building one-off prototypes and racing cars that nobody was in the market for, and continued to burn through cash. But the Vallelunga was still a promising start. The cost was kept down by purchasing parts from other manufacturers, and while its Ford Cortina engine eked out around 100 horsepower, its extremely lightweight body made it nimble around the corners. But De Tomaso needed a car that could be mass-produced. And to do that, he needed to expand his company. And to do that, he needed more money. Enter rich brother-in-law Amory Haskell. Amory Haskell was an executive of a successful electronics company who also had an interest in purchasing automotive brands. Alejandro convinced Amory that there was this little Italian coach builder called Ghia that was up for sale. It was at a fair discount because the guy who owned it was in jail and needed bail money. With the Haskell's stimulus check, Alejandro swooped up Carrozzeria Ghia, which would be put to good use in building his future road cars. Oh, as for the previous owner of Ghia, his name was Ramfis Trujillo, the son of the dictator of Dominican Republic, and an absolute Now with expanded business, Alejandro could work on the next car, the Mangusta. With a presence that could easily challenge the prestige of Ferrari, the Mangusta boasted a Ford 302 engine producing 320 horsepower. While the Mangusta fared much better in the market than the Vallelunga, only about 400 units were produced. And Alejandro really couldn't afford to continue building in low quantity, as he went back into F1, making F1 cars for none other than Frank Williams' F1 team, the Type 505. But the 1970 F1 season proved to be the last straw that broke Alejandro's racing spirit. At the Dutch Grand Prix in Zandvoort, the De Tomaso 505, driven by Pierce Courage under the Williams banner, hit a curb on lap 22, launching the car into a grass embankment and exploding on impact. The driver died instantly. And Alejandro never returned to F1. Returning to the Mangusta, the car soon proved to be exactly the car De Tomaso needed, because the car had grabbed the attention of none other than Lee Iacocca. Ford, after numerous failed attempts at buying an Italian sports car brand, finally struck gold with De Tomaso. Although the scale was much smaller than, say, Ferrari, the Mangusta showed promise, and Alejandro's eager attitude no doubt made the negotiations easier. In 1971, Ford bought a significant share of De Tomaso Ghia and Vignale, and quickly entered the development of what would be the best-selling car De Tomaso would ever make, the Pantera. With a massive 5.8-liter Ford V8 mounted behind the driver's seat, the car was as powerful as it was dangerous. But the mechanical and quality issues that plagued the Mangusta and the early versions of the Pantera were slowly improved, mostly thanks to Ford's direct intervention. And its relatively low cost compared to similarly striking Italian sports cars drew big crowds. Around 7,000 units were built in total, with 6,000 of them being sold in the US. For De Tomaso, it was once-in-a-lifetime deal, a diamond mine. Unfortunately for De Tomaso, that was exactly what it was. In 1974, the oil crisis and the subsequent traffic laws in the US soon proved the Pantera an expensive investment for Ford. Ford completely cut ties with De Tomaso, which meant that De Tomaso had just lost their biggest market. And the 70s oil crisis was catastrophic for Italian car manufacturers too, with GPI, the Italian state-owned holdings company dedicated to rescuing bankrupt industries, frantically running around in an attempt to save the factories from laying off their workers. But Alejandro saw this as an opportunity. Even before the Ford partnership sank underwater, Alejandro went on a shopping spree, purchasing struggling Italian motorcycle companies like Benelli and Moto Guzzi. He was then recruited by GPI in 1975 and bought Maserati, and then Innocenti a year later, both at steep discounts, effectively saving them from bankruptcies. But the chain acquisition was not as reckless as it seems on the surface. While the Pantera was still in production, De Tomaso had expanded into luxury grand touring cars with the Deauville and the Longchamp. And with the purchase of Maserati, Alejandro immediately went to work, transitioning Maserati from building expensive and low-volume high-end sports cars to high-volume grand tours with lowered costs by sharing the platform with the Deauville and the Longchamps. By 1989, both grand tours were out of production, but the Pantera continued production until 1992. And what replaced it was the Guara. But you may have never heard of this one before because, well, De Tomaso only made 50 of these. The company quickly lost steam after losing their US market. And when Alejandro suffered a stroke in 1993, the company began to slowly unravel itself with the absence of its eccentric founder. The reins of the company would eventually go over to his son, Santiago, which made the Guara the last car to be produced under Alejandro's supervision before he passed away in 2003. A man whose life had spawned cool cars, most of them built poorly but cool nonetheless, left us with the most prized gift. Maserati. A fascinating life story. Thank you for watching this video. This was a tough one. The numerous accounts of Alejandro's early years were nearly impossible to verify, and honestly speaking, everything that reportedly happened before he moved to Italy is something that we should take with a grain of salt. But hey, if anyone watching this did read through the Blue Racing Blood and can confirm or correct some of the stories shared about the De Tomaso, please do share them in the comments. I would love to know more. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.